My sister drugged me at 14 to steal my crush. Now she's a nurse with access to my meds. My sister Savannah was always the perfect sister with her perfect family and perfect life. All while I was the family mess-up who almost died from overdosing at 14. I always thought the OD was my fault too, until last week when I was helping her prep for our parents' anniversary party. I was digging through dusty boxes in her basement when I knocked one over and this hospital bracelet fell out with her name on it from the exact same night I supposedly tried to unalive myself. She'd never once mentioned being at the hospital that night. For 12 years, the story was that I stole mom's heart pills, mixed them with vodka, and my brother-in-law Jamal saved my life, which is how their great love story began. But here was proof that some part of that night was a lie. I shoved the bracelet in my pocket and went upstairs where she was arranging flowers, humming to herself while her kids played and Jamal grilled outside like some Pinterest fantasy. That night, I couldn't let it go, so I tracked down Tracy, my sister's high school best friend. She looked like she wanted to run when she saw me, but when I showed her the bracelet, she went pale and finally spilled everything. Apparently, Savannah had been obsessed with Jamal, who'd actually asked me to homecoming, which I don't even remember because that whole month is basically gone from my head. The night of the party, I OD'd. Savannah kept saying I looked stressed and handed me a drink, then left early saying she felt sick, but not before making sure Jamal knew exactly where the party was and mentioning I was there. Then he found me and called an ambulance, saving my life. Next thing I knew, everyone said I tried to unalive myself, and because I couldn't remember anything, I just believed it. I spent the days after Tracy told me this Facebook stalking people from high school until I found 3 who remembered Savannah giving me that red cup. And this one girl, Kelly, still had an ancient flip phone with a blurry photo of Savannah walking toward me holding a drink right before my memory goes black. When I requested my hospital records, which took forever, I found out I had 0 alcohol in my blood, just enough of mom's heart medication to stop a horse. The ER doctor even wrote that my sister insisted she saw me taking pills from mom's cabinet earlier. I drove straight to Savannah's house while Jamal was at work and the kids were at school. I confronted her and she actually broke down sobbing, saying she only wanted to make me sick enough to miss homecoming, not call me. But I drank it all at once instead of sipping it. And when I collapsed, she panicked and had a friend drive her to the hospital, then called Jamal to be the hero. She kept saying she was just 17 and stupid and look how everything turned out. That I was fine, and she had this beautiful life and helped people as a nurse. I wanted to throw up listening to her justify almost killing me. When I told Jamal later on, he looked like he'd been punched, but then said, "What do you expect me to do now? Destroy my family because of something that happened when we were kids?" I realized this eye-hole was choosing her story over my life. That's when Savannah started her counterattack, sending me screenshots of Adderall I bought during college finals with a message about who would believe the family addict over a respected healthcare worker. At Sunday dinner, I tried telling our parents everything, but Savannah immediately jumped in with concerns about my sobriety. Then Savannah said she saw pills in my purse that had obviously been planted, but suddenly it was an intervention about my problems. My entire family started turning against me all over again. I was so desperate I asked Savannah to meet for coffee to apologize. I secretly recorded her admitting everything, but the psycho actually twisted it saying she saved me from sleeping with an older boy and ruining my life, and the OD gave me a clean slate to become who I was meant to be. When I played the recording for my parents, Mom just sighed and said they already knew because Savannah confessed when she turned 18, but what good would come from destroying her life now when I survived? She went on to say she has children and saves lives as a nurse. I threatened to go public, and Savannah smiled this cold smile I'd never seen before. She showed me all these documents she'd been creating for years, painting a picture of me as dangerous and unstable, and I realized my own sister had been building a case against me since we were teenagers. She scheduled an emergency psychiatric appointment for me the next day, and when the therapist called to confirm, they mentioned having a bed ready at their inpatient facility if needed, based on Savannah's concerns about my recent behavior. I had to decide whether to run and look guilty, or show up and risk being locked up by my sister, who already proved she'll do anything to protect her perfect messed up life. I barely slept that night thinking about what to do. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my phone. I kept checking the time and wondering if I should just pack up and leave town. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in, and every shadow made me jump. I must have gotten up to check the locks on my door at least 10 times. But then I remembered Tracy and how she looked when she told me the truth. Her eyes had been haunted, like she'd been carrying this secret for years and it had been eating away at her. I called her at like 3 a.m. and asked if she'd come with me to the appointment. She was quiet for a long time, then said yes. Her voice was barely a whisper, but I could hear the determination in it. I picked her up the next morning and we drove to the therapist's office in silence. The sky was overcast, matching my mood perfectly. Tracy kept fidgeting with her seatbelt and checking her phone like she was expecting Savannah to somehow know what we were doing. The building looked normal enough, but I felt like I was walking into a trap. It was one of those modern medical complexes with too much glass and steel, trying to look welcoming but feeling cold. The receptionist smiled at me, and I wondered if she knew what Savannah had told them about me. Her smile seemed too bright, too knowing. We sat in the waiting room and Tracy kept bouncing her leg. The sound of her heel tapping against the floor was the only noise besides the soft classical music playing overhead. I asked if she was okay, and she just nodded, but her face was pale and her hands were clenched in her lap. When they called my name, my heart started racing. The walk down the hallway felt endless, each step echoing like a countdown. The therapist was this older woman named Dr. Linda, who seemed nice enough at first. She had gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and wore glasses that made her eyes look bigger. Her office smelled like lavender and had those generic inspirational posters on the walls. She asked me to tell her why I was there, and I started explaining everything from the beginning. About finding the bracelet and what Tracy told me and the hospital records. My voice kept cracking and I had to stop several times to catch my breath. Dr. Linda kept writing notes and nodding, her expression neutral but attentive. Then I told her Tracy was there and could confirm what happened at the party. She asked if Tracy could join us, and when she came in, the whole energy in the room changed. Tracy looked even smaller in the big leather chair, like she wanted to disappear into it. She kept glancing at me for reassurance before she started talking. Tracy told her about watching Savannah give me the drink and how she'd been acting weird all night. She said Savannah kept checking her phone and looking at the door like she was waiting for something. Her voice got stronger as she spoke, like finally telling the truth was giving her courage. Dr. Linda stopped writing and just stared at us. She asked Tracy if she was willing to repeat this in front of Savannah. Tracy went pale but said yes, her jaw set with determination. determination. Dr. Linda made a phone call, and 20 minutes later, Savannah walked in looking perfect as always. She was wearing her scrubs like armor, her hair in a perfect ponytail, makeup flawless. She smiled at the doctor and ignored me completely, like I wasn't even in the room. Dr. Linda explained that there were some concerning discrepancies in the stories she was hearing. Savannah started her whole concerned sister act, but Dr. Linda cut her off with a raised hand. She asked Savannah directly about the night I overdosed. Savannah stuck to her story at first about finding me with the pills, her voice dripping with fake concern, but then Dr. Linda asked about the hospital bracelet. Savannah's face changed for just a second before she recovered, a flash of panic quickly masked. She said she'd gone to the hospital because she was so worried about me. Dr. Linda asked why she was admitted 2 hours before me if she found me with the pills. The question hung in the air like a trap closing. Savannah started stumbling over her words, her perfect composure cracking. Then Tracy spoke up and told the whole story again right to Savannah's face. Her voice was steady now, each word deliberate and clear. Savannah tried to interrupt, but Dr. Linda told her to let Tracy finish. When she was done, the room was dead silent. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall, marking each excruciating second. Savannah's mask was slipping, and I could see the panic in her eyes. She started rambling about how I'd been acting strange, and she was just trying to help. Her hands were moving as she talked, gesturing wildly like she could somehow reshape reality with her movements. Then she said the words that changed everything. She said she only wanted to make me miss homecoming because Jamal deserved better. The words tumbled out before she could stop him, raw and honest for the first time. Dr. Linda's pen stopped moving. She asked Savannah to repeat what she just said. Savannah realized her mistake and tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The truth was finally out there in front of a professional who wasn't family, someone who couldn't be manipulated or guilt-tripped into silence. The silence in that room was deafening. Dr. Linda set down her pen and looked at Savannah like she was seeing her for the first time. She asked Savannah to clarify what she meant about making me miss homecoming. Savannah's face went from red to white and back again. She kept opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water. Finally, she said she misspoke and meant she wanted to help me avoid a bad situation. Dr. Linda wasn't buying it, and neither was anyone else in that room. The session ended with Dr. Linda saying she needed time to process everything. She told us she'd be in touch and asked if I felt safe going home. I said yes, even though I wasn't sure. Savannah stormed out without looking at anyone. Her heels clicked angrily on the tile floor as she left. Tracy and I sat in my car for like 20 minutes just processing what happened. She kept saying she couldn't believe Savannah actually admitted it. I dropped Tracy off and went home feeling like maybe things would finally change. That night, Jamal called me. His voice sounded different, tired and confused. He asked if we could meet somewhere neutral to talk. We met at this diner downtown where nobody we knew would see us. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect clothes were wrinkled and he kept rubbing his face. He told me Savannah came home from the appointment hysterical. She'd told him some story about how I was trying to destroy their family out of jealousy. But something in her story didn't add up, and he'd been thinking about it ever since I first told him. He asked me to tell him everything again from the beginning. So I did, showing him the bracelet and the hospital records on my phone. His face got paler with each detail. When I finished, he just sat there staring at his coffee. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said Savannah had been acting strange lately, even before I found the bracelet. She'd been deleting texts and clearing her browser history obsessively. She'd also been moving money around in their accounts without explanation. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. I kept waiting for Savannah to strike back, but nothing happened. I went to work and came home like normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Then on Thursday, I got a call from my apartment complex. They said someone had reported seeing me dealing substances in the parking lot. I was floored because I hadn't even been home much that week. The manager said they had to investigate, but the description didn't really match me. Still, it was a warning shot, and I knew who fired it. Friday morning, I woke up to find my car had been keyed. The word liar was scratched deep into the driver's side door. I filed a police report, but without proof it was Savannah, they couldn't do anything. I started parking in different spots and varying my routine. I felt like I was going crazy, jumping at every sound and checking over my shoulder constantly. My coworkers started noticing I was on edge and kept asking if I was okay. That weekend, our cousin Rachel was getting married. The whole family would be there, and I dreaded it. I thought about not going, but that would just give Savannah more ammunition. So I put on my brave face and showed up. The venue was beautiful, all fairy lights and flowers. I tried to blend in and avoid drama. Savannah was there playing perfect sister-in-law, laughing and chatting like nothing was wrong. She'd even brought a gift for Rachel that was way too expensive, clearly trying to win points. During the reception, I went to the bathroom, and when I came back, my purse was on the floor. Nothing seemed missing, but I had a bad feeling. Sure enough, when I got home, I found a bag of pills tucked into an inside pocket I never used. My hands were shaking as I flushed them down the toilet. I knew Savannah was escalating, and I needed to be more careful. I started carrying my purse with me everywhere, even to the bathroom. Monday morning, Dr. Linda called and asked if I could come in for another session. She said she'd been reviewing her notes and had some concerns. When I got there, she told me she'd done some research and talked to colleagues. She believed something traumatic had happened to me, but she was concerned about the family dynamics. She suggested family therapy, but I laughed at that idea. Savannah would never agree to real therapy where she couldn't control the narrative. That afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number with a photo of me at work. The message said, "Always watching." I showed it to my manager, and they let me leave early. I drove around for an hour, making sure no one was following me before going home. I was starting to feel like a character in a thriller movie, except this was my actual life. I changed my phone number and only gave it to a few trusted people. Jamal called me from his office later that week. He said he'd been doing some digging of his own. He'd found charges on their credit cards for private investigators and background check services dating back years. All of them were in Savannah's name, and all seemed to be focused on me. He also found emails she'd sent to various therapists over the years expressing concern about my mental health. She'd been building this case against me for over a decade. He said he was thinking about separation, but was worried about the kids. Their son Thomas was only 8, and their daughter Ashley was 6. He didn't want to traumatize them, but he couldn't look at Savannah the same way. He asked if I had any advice, and I honestly didn't know what to tell him. How do you explain to kids that their mom tried to call their aunt when they were teenagers? You don't. That's how. The next Sunday was our monthly family dinner. I almost didn't go, but I was tired of letting Savannah control my life. I showed up with my head high and a recording app ready on my phone. Savannah was in the kitchen with Mom acting like Martha Stewart. She gave me this fake smile and asked how I was doing. doing? I said fine and helped set the table. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Halfway through dinner, Savannah started her performance. She mentioned how worried she was about me and how I seemed paranoid lately. She brought up the police report about my car and twisted it to make it sound like I was having delusions. Mom looked concerned and asked what was going on. I tried to explain, but Savannah kept interrupting with these little concerned sighs and head shakes. It was masterful manipulation, and I could see my parents buying it. Then Jamal spoke up. He said he'd been noticing some concerning behavior too, but not from me. The table went silent as he looked directly at Savannah. He said she'd been secretive and paranoid, deleting things and hiding papers. Savannah's face went white then red. She accused him of taking my side because he felt guilty about the past. But Jamal kept going, laying out what he'd found about the private investigators and the money. Dad finally spoke up and asked what was really going on. For the first time in my life, I saw him look at Savannah with something new. Not first-time suspicion, but a deeper realization about the extent of her ongoing deception. The parents had known about the poisoning confession, but seeing this pattern of continued manipulation made him truly understand who she'd become. I took the opportunity to show them the text with the photo and explain about the pills planted in my purse. Savannah tried to deny it, but her voice was shaking. Mom asked her directly if she'd been stalking me. Savannah's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The dinner ended with everyone upset and nothing resolved, but at least the seeds of doubt were planted. Jamal left with the kids while Savannah stayed to help clean up, which I knew meant damage control. I left as soon as I could, feeling emotionally drained. Progress was being made, but at what cost? My family was falling apart, and even though it wasn't my fault, I felt responsible. That night, I couldn't sleep again, and I kept replaying the dinner in my head and wondering what Savannah would do next. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, I woke up to messages from several coworkers asking if I was okay. Apparently, someone had sent an anonymous email to my entire office claiming I was unstable and dangerous. The email included photos of me at various locations and snippets of conversations taken out of context. My boss called me in first thing. He said he didn't believe the email but had to follow protocol. I showed him everything: the hospital records, the planted pills, the stalking texts. He was shocked but supportive. He suggested I work from home for a few days while they investigated. I agreed, even though it felt like letting Savannah win, but I needed to be smart about this, not reactive. I spent those days at home documenting everything. I made copies of all the evidence and stored them in multiple places. I also reached out to a lawyer friend named Kenneth, who said what Savannah was doing could be considered harassment. He suggested I start building a case for a restraining order. The idea of taking legal action against my own sister made me sick, but what choice did I have? Tracy called me crying on Wednesday. She said Savannah had shown up at her work and caused a scene. She accused Tracy of lying and trying to destroy her family. Security had to escort Savannah out, and Tracy was mortified. She said she couldn't do this anymore, and I understood. She'd already done more than I could have asked. I told her to take care of herself and thanked her for everything. Thursday brought a new low. I went to get groceries and my credit card was declined. Then another and another. I called the bank and found out someone had reported all my cards as stolen. It took hours to sort out and prove my identity. While I was dealing with that, my landlord called. Someone had sent them an anonymous tip about illegal activity in my apartment. He said he had to do an inspection, which I agreed to because I had nothing to hide. The inspection was humiliating even though they found nothing. My neighbors were watching and whispering. I felt like my life was being dismantled piece by piece. That night, I sat in my apartment with all the lights off just thinking, how far would Savannah go? Would she ever stop? Part of me wanted to give up and just disappear, but a bigger part was angry. She'd stolen 12 years of my life with her lies. I wasn't going to let her steal anymore. Friday morning, Jamal called with news. He'd installed security cameras at their house without telling Savannah. He wanted to see if she was acting suspicious when he wasn't around. What he found was worse than suspicious. He had footage of her in his home office going through his papers and taking photos. He also caught her on the phone saying she needed to deal with the problem permanently. He couldn't hear who she was talking to, but the implication was clear. He said he was done and would be filing for divorce. He was also worried about my safety and suggested I stay with friends for a while. I appreciated his concern, but I was tired of running. Instead, I went to the police with everything. The officer I spoke to, Officer Donald, took me seriously. He said while some of it was hard to prove, the pattern of harassment was clear. He suggested I file for a restraining order immediately. I spent the weekend at Kenneth's office preparing the paperwork. We included everything from the hospital bracelet to the recent harassment. Kenneth said it was one of the most comprehensive cases he'd seen. He also suggested I change my locks and install security cameras. I did both that day, feeling like I was preparing for war, which I guess I was in a way. Monday came with unexpected support. Several of my coworkers reached out to say they didn't believe the email and had my back. My boss called to say their investigation found the email came from a fake account and they considered the matter closed. I could return to work whenever I felt ready. It was a small victory, but I'd take it. I went back the next day with my head high. That evening, I was cooking dinner when my phone rang. It was Mom and she was crying. She said Savannah had come over hysterical, saying Jamal was leaving her and taking the kids. She begged Mom to talk to me, to make me stop ruining her life. Mom said she told Savannah that she'd ruined her own life the night she poisoned me. It was the first time Mom had used that word, poison, and it hit me hard. Mom asked if I could come over so we could all talk. I said no. I was done with family meetings where Savannah could manipulate everyone. If Mom wanted to talk, she could come to me. An hour later, she showed up at my door with Dad. They looked older somehow, worn down by the family drama. We sat in my living room and really talked for the first time in years. They told me about Savannah's confession when she turned 18, how she'd cried and said it was an accident, that she'd just wanted to make me sick. They'd been young parents, overwhelmed and unsure what to do. They'd convinced themselves that since I survived and didn't remember, it was better to move forward. They admitted they'd failed me and asked for forgiveness. I cried harder than I had in years. We talked for hours about everything, about how Savannah had always been jealous of any attention I got, about how they'd enabled her behavior by always smoothing things over, about how my sewers lied attempt had defined our family dynamic for over a decade. Dad said they'd pay for therapy for me, real therapy with someone I chose. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. The next few days were strangely quiet. No harassment, no weird emails, no stalking. I should have been relieved, but instead, I was on edge. Savannah didn't give up that easily. Jamal texted that she'd moved back in with our parents and was playing the victim hard. She'd told everyone who would listen that I'd seduced her husband and turned her family against her. Some people believed her because she was that good good at playing the perfect woman wronged. Thursday afternoon, I was leaving work when I noticed my car was sitting lower than usual. I walked around and found all 4 tires had been slashed. Security footage showed a figure in a hoodie doing it, but you couldn't see their face. I had to get it towed and rent a car. The expense was frustrating, but what really got to me was the violation. She knew where I worked, where I lived, where I went. I felt like prey being stalked. That night, I stayed at a hotel under a fake name. I needed one night of peace to think clearly. I ordered room service and took a long bath trying to figure out my next move. The restraining order was still being processed, but even if it went through, would a piece of paper stop Savannah? I doubted it. She'd proven she was willing to risk everything to protect her image. Friday brought the breakthrough I'd been waiting for. Jamal called early, his voice excited. He'd been going through old boxes in their basement and found something. It was a journal Savannah had kept in high school. In it, she detailed her plan to make me sick so I'd miss homecoming. She'd researched mom's medication and calculated doses. She'd even practiced her concerned sister act in the mirror. It was all there in her own handwriting. He'd made copies and was sending them to me and Kenneth. He was also giving them to his divorce lawyer. He said reading it made him physically ill. The calculation and planning that went into it from a 17-year-old was sociopathic. He apologized again for not believing me initially. I told him I understood. Savannah had fooled everyone for years. He wasn't the first or the last. That afternoon, I met with Kenneth to review the journal. He said it was a smoking GN for the restraining order and possibly criminal charges. We decided to submit it as additional evidence immediately. He also suggested I consider pressing charges for the attempted murder 12 years ago. The statute of limitations hadn't run out, and with this evidence, there was a real case. The thought was overwhelming, but I said I'd consider it. I went home feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. Maybe justice was actually possible. I should have known better. When I got to my apartment, my door was slightly open. I knew I'd locked it that morning. I called 911 and waited in my car. The police arrived quickly and cleared the apartment. Nothing was missing, but things had been moved. Pictures turned around, drawers left open, subtle violations meant to unnerve me. Officer Donald took it seriously, especially with the restraining order pending. He said they'd increase patrols in my area and suggested I stay elsewhere for the weekend. I packed a bag and went to stay with my friend Linda from college. She lived an hour away, and Savannah didn't know her. It felt good to be somewhere safe, to sleep without jumping at every noise. Saturday, I got a call from Mom. Savannah had been arrested. After leaving my apartment, she'd gone to Jamal's office and caused a scene. She'd thrown things and threatened his secretary when she wouldn't let her in. Security called the police, and she was charged with disorderly conduct and trespassing. Mom was devastated, but I felt relieved. Finally, there were consequences for her actions. The restraining order was approved Monday morning. Kenneth called to tell me and warned that serving it might escalate things. He was right. 2 hours after she was served, my work email was flooded with messages from fake accounts, hundreds of them calling me every name imaginable. It had to shut down my account and give me a new one. Then the phone calls started. Different numbers, but always silence on the other end. I was documenting everything, building a harassment case that was ironclad, but living like this was exhausting. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, checking my car for damage, screening every call. My friends tried to be supportive, but I could see the strain it put on them. Nobody wants to be around someone who might bring danger into their life. I didn't blame them for slowly pulling away. Jamal was dealing with his own nightmare. Savannah was fighting the divorce viciously, making wild accusations about abuse and infidelity. She'd tried to empty their bank accounts, but he'd frozen them just in time. The kids were confused and acting out. Thomas had started having nightmares, and Ashley was clingy and anxious. He'd put them in therapy, but it was a mess. Sometimes I wondered if exposing the truth had been worth all this pain. Then came the night that changed everything. I was at Linda's house again when my phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Jamal, and he was panicked. Savannah had shown up at the house hammered and demanding to see the kids. When he wouldn't let her in, she'd started breaking windows. He'd called the police and locked himself and the kids in the master bedroom. I could hear glass breaking and Savannah screaming in the background. I told him to stay on the line and called 911 on Linda's phone. I gave them the address and explained the situation. They said units were already on the way. I stayed on with Jamal, listening to him try to calm the kids while Savannah raged outside the door. She was screaming about how I'd ruined everything, how she should have used more pills, how she'd finished the job this time. The police arrived just as she was trying to break down the bedroom door. I heard them ordering her to stop, then sounds of a struggle. Jamal came back on the line saying they had her in custody. The kids were scared but safe. He sounded exhausted and defeated. I told him to focus on the kids and we'd deal with everything else later, but I knew this was far from over. The arrest made the local news. Local nurse arrested in domestic disturbance was the headline. Savannah's perfect image was finally cracking publicly. She was charged with multiple counts, including violating the restraining order, destruction of property, and making terroristic threats. Bail was set high, and for once, our parents didn't rush to pay it. Mom later told me they'd finally accepted who Savannah really was. I thought maybe her being in jail would give me some peace, but her flying monkeys came out instead. Her nursing friends started a social media campaign painting her as a devoted mother being kept from her children. They shared old photos of her volunteering and saving lives. The comments were brutal, calling me jealous and vindictive. Some even said I deserved what happened when I was 14. I had to make all my accounts private and stop reading them. Kenneth said the social media stuff actually helped our case. It showed a pattern of harassment by proxy. He was working with the prosecutor to add charges related to the poisoning 12 years ago. The journal was key evidence, and they were building a strong case. He warned me it would be a long process, and Savannah would fight hard. But for the first time, the law was on my side. A week later, Savannah made bail. One of her nursing friends put up the money. The restraining order meant she couldn't contact me directly, but I still felt unsafe. I varied my routines, stayed vigilant, and kept documenting everything. Jamal had gotten a restraining order too, and had full temporary custody of the kids. He'd hired security for their house and was looking at moving. The life Savannah had built was crumbling. Then she made her biggest mistake. In her desperation to regain control, she decided to frame me one last time. But this time, she got sloppy. Maybe it was the stress or the drinking she'd started doing. Maybe it was the rage that clouded her judgment. Whatever the reason, she didn't notice the security camera Jamal had installed in their garage, the one that caught her clear as day planting substances in my car. She'd used the spare key. I didn't know she had to get into my car while it was parked at the grocery store. But Jamal had been reviewing footage looking for anything suspicious and saw her leave the house with a small bag. He followed the timeline and pulled security footage footage through his lawyer from the store. There she was, bold as day, putting something under my passenger seat. He called me immediately and told me not to touch my car. I called Officer Donald, who came right away with a substance dog. They found a significant amount of pills hidden under the seat, the kind of quantity that would have meant serious charges. Officer Donald said with the video evidence, this was attempted evidence tampering and conspiracy. Combined with her other charges, Savannah was looking at real prison time. I sat in my car and cried, not from sadness but from relief. They arrested her that night at our parents' house. Mom called me sobbing, saying Savannah had tried to run when she saw the police. They had to tackle her on the front lawn in front of all the neighbors. The perfect suburban princess reduced to being handcuffed in the grass. Part of me felt bad for my parents, but a bigger part felt vindicated. Finally, everyone could see what I'd been dealing with. This time, bail was denied. The judge said she was a flight risk and a danger to others. Savannah's lawyer argued, but the video evidence was damning. As they led her away, she looked at me with such hatred I actually stepped back. But for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. She couldn't hurt me anymore. The truth was finally more powerful than her lies. The next few weeks were weird. I kept waiting for something bad to happen, but nothing did. I went to work, came home, and actually slept through the night. My coworkers stopped giving me those worried looks. I even went to Target without checking over my shoulder every 5 seconds. It was like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. Jamal called me one afternoon while I was making lunch. He said the kids were doing better now that things had calmed down. Thomas had stopped having nightmares and Ashley was back to her bubbly self. He'd found them a good therapist who specialized in family trauma. They still didn't understand why mommy couldn't come home, but they felt safe again. That's what mattered most. He also told me something that made my jaw drop. While going through Savannah's things, he'd found a safety deposit box key. When he opened it, there were copies of documents about me going back years. Report cards, medical records, even photos taken without my knowledge. But the worst part was a letter she'd written but never sent. In it, she detailed how she'd always hated me for being born and stealing attention. She wrote about planning the poisoning for months and being disappointed when I survived. Kenneth said the letter was more evidence for the prosecution. Combined with the journal and the video, Savannah's lawyer was pushing for a plea deal. They wanted to avoid trial where all the dirty laundry would be aired publicly. The prosecutor was considering it but wanted my input. I thought about it for days. Part of me wanted her to face a jury and have everyone know what she did, but another part just wanted it over. Mom and Dad were struggling. They'd started therapy themselves to deal with the guilt and shame. Dad told me he kept replaying every family dinner, every holiday, looking for signs he'd missed. Mom couldn't stop crying about how she'd failed both her daughters. I told them to focus on healing, not blame. We couldn't change the past, but we could do better going forward. The plea negotiations dragged on for weeks. Savannah's lawyer kept trying to minimize the charges while the prosecutor held firm. Kenneth kept me updated but said these things take time. Meanwhile, I was trying to rebuild my life. I started seeing a therapist Dr. Linda had recommended. Her name was Dr. Virginia and she specialized in family trauma and gaslighting survivors. Our first session was rough. I cried through most of it just trying to explain everything. Dr. Virginia was patient and kind. She said what I'd experienced was psychological torture and it would take time to heal. She gave me exercises to help with the hypervigilance and anxiety. Slowly, session by session, I started feeling more like myself. Or maybe I was finally discovering who I really was without Savannah's shadow. 3 months after her arrest, Savannah took a plea deal. 8 years in prison with possibility of parole in 5. She had to allocute to the poisoning and the recent harassment. Kenneth said it was a good deal considering she could have gotten much more. The judge also upheld the permanent restraining order and ordered her to have no contact with me or Jamal's family even after release. I didn't go to the sentencing. Jamal did and said Savannah looked different. Thinner, older, with dark roots showing through her perfect blonde hair. She read a statement taking responsibility, but it sounded hollow. The judge didn't buy it either and gave a harsh speech about abuse of trust and the damage done to family. When they led her away in shackles, she didn't look at anyone.